Today we are going to talk about overcomers. What it means to be an overcomer. And we always say that you cannot be an overcomer without going first through a battle, without going through a war. There is no overcoming without a battle. And unfortunately, many times we are not prepared to face the battle. We just await for the moment of becoming overcomers without first battling the battle. And we fail many times to trust in the Lord that whatever trials He accepts or He allows us to go through, He is there to help us, He is there to support us, and we will never fail if we stay close to Him. So coming back to our study, I would like us to read in Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, verses that have been read a lot in the last 16 hours. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. We know that this Bible verse has at least a double application, if not three applications in reality, making reference to the fact that the dragon, Satan, was very much concerned about the birth of Jesus Christ, and to prevent his birth, or at least to prevent the beginning of his ministry here on earth, he decided that he would just wait through the pagan Rome for the baby Jesus to be born so that they would kill him. And we know that throughout the history, Satan has been trying to prevent the positive prophecies that would bring about our salvation to fulfill. Again, the dragon was wroth with the woman, which we know has the other application as being the church, and went to make war not with the woman, but with the remnant of her seed. We are going to explain a little bit what the woman means and why is there a remnant. Why isn't there a war with the woman, but only with the remnant? If you look throughout the history, God's church was represented by different organizations that were the woman. But unfortunately, in these organizations, different interests prevailed, and which led to apostasy. And in every church that was God's church, that was the woman, at the end there was a remnant that remained faithful to God. And that is the remnant of her seed which Satan makes war against. Of course, we believe that we are part of the remnant. We believe that we would be the ones that will be faithful till the end. And of course, we are going to understand today what it means to be the remnant, what responsibility that is, and how far we would have to go to still be the remnant at the end. Because now it's kind of easy for us to be called the remnant, because we can worship in freedom, we can read the Bible in freedom, we can, spiritually we can be fed different ways. We can watch it on television, we can watch it live stream. Our spirituality can grow and can be strong because we depend on so many avenues through which God is blessing us. But the time will come when these privileges will be taken away from us, when all we are going to have is our God and probably the Bible that we have in our memory. The time will come when we will have to stand alone, when the remnant will only be us. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, will we still be the remnant when those that we depend on right now will not be by our side anymore? In Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, we have a prophecy, and at the same time, we have a promise. It reads, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." We know that this makes reference to Satan and to the remnant of God's church. At the same time, it makes reference to the birth of Jesus Christ as a Savior here on earth. But I will specifically talk about the application that is addressed to the church, to us today. The enmity that God is putting between Satan and us today is not is actually a promise, is a positive thing, because unless there is this enmity between us and sin, between us and Satan, we won't really experience salvation. Because salvation is exactly the opposite of what Satan is offering. And when we want something that is opposite to the character of Satan, there will be conflict between us and Satan. So having enmity between us and sin, or between us and Satan, is actually a good thing, even though it talks about a conflict, right? But the prophecy and the good news is that even though the church or we will be bruised to the heel, the final result is that Christ and us, through Christ, are going to bruise the head of the serpent. And we all know that being hurt to the heel may be temporarily hurtful, may be temporarily a pain to us, but having the bruise to the head means that the wound is mortal. So the good news is that even though throughout the history Satan could affect God's church in a way through persecution or through apostasy many times, at the end Satan would receive a wound to the head and he will not recover from it. And this is why we are considered to be overcomers. We are considered to be the triumphant church at the end, because we, through Christ, are going to be overcomers over temptation and over all the tools Satan is using against us. The dragon, or Satan, has been trying to destroy the seed of the woman ever since this promise has been made in Genesis 3:15. If you remember, there were prophecies about the family from which Jesus would be born, remember? And Satan, knowing the prophecies about it, he tried to prevent the birth of Jesus by always bringing trouble in these specific families. If we only remember the experience between Esau and Jacob, we know that Jacob had been promised to be the one, or that from his family, Jesus would be born. But he didn't have patience to receive that blessing, so he deceived his brother to receive the blessing beforehand. And that brought about so much trouble and put to risk the fulfillment of this prophecy and the fulfillment of this promise. And I imagine that Satan was so happy that there was a conflict between Esau and Jacob. And he was looking forward to the moment of their encounter and to the moment of when Esau would kill Jacob. Because if Jacob would die, then it would be difficult or maybe impossible for Jesus to be born, because Jacob would not be there anymore. So he was looking forward to their encounter, and he was expecting a huge conflict, and Jacob would finally die. But at the end, we remember the story that when they met, actually, they embraced each other and they cried on each other's shoulder. And I imagine that Satan was enraged. He could not believe it. And then throughout the history, we see him acting the same way again, either through persecution or through apostasy. In the case of David, we know that the prophecy also says that from the family of David, Jesus would be born. And Satan tempted him so hard, he fell into sin, and Satan was hoping that David would never recover, and so he would not be able to receive this blessing. And at the end, David recovered from his experience, he repented, and he could again be the representative of Jesus Christ, of God himself. And when we look back, we see that persecution was one of the tools that Satan tried to use to destroy the remnant of the seed. And throughout many years, we remember very well through the Middle Ages, Satan was trying to destroy the remnant through persecution. But the more Christians would give their blood, would give their life for the gospel, the more Christians would come out of it. And the spirit of prophecy says that the blood of the martyrs were like a seed that was bringing forth a lot of more fruits. So finally, paganism gave up on this method of trying to destroy the woman and the remnant of her seed, and applied different methods. Remember when Constantine was so-called converted to Christianity, that he, as a leader, as an emperor, he decided that he would punish those that had persecuted Christianity. Remember that experience? When he decided that those that had persecuted Christianity would be punished. Now, the Christians were still in the catacombs. They were hiding away from persecution when they heard the news that the emperor had been converted to Christianity. Now, if you were living in that time, or if today an emperor or the president of the country would become a Christian, would become a reformer, would you be happy about it? Would that be a good news? It would be a good news, right? We would be thrilled to know that we will have such a member in our church. But you see, with good news came also bad news. And we know how Constantine called out the Christians from the catacombs. He invited them to visit Rome, to visit the palaces, and invited them even to occupy the throne in Rome, because Constantine was going to move his throne to Constantinople. So the Christians came from the catacombs. Who knows what conditions they were sleeping in, who knows how they were sitting, when they were eating. And when they sat on the throne of Constantine, they felt so good that they would not get up again. They decided that that was comfortable enough for them. They just witnessed with their eyes how Constantine moved his throne to Constantinople, and now the kings were the Christians that had just come out of the catacombs. But as the time went by, they became so luxurious that it didn't fit very well with those that were still faithful to God's commandments. So the ones that remained faithful and still wanted to live the simple life of Jesus, they decided that they would protest against the luxurious life of the papacy, that became papacy finally. They protested against it, and those that used to be persecuted now decided to persecute their brethren. And you see where this comfortable life leads us when we do not watch and pray. So, as a result, we read in the Spirit of Prophecy in Great Controversy, page 49, that the spirit of compromise and conformity was restrained for a time by the fierce persecution which the church endured under paganism. So, what does he say? That the spirit of compromise and conformity to the world was retained by the persecution, which meant that the Christians, actually through persecution, remained faithful to God, and persecution helped them to remain faithful to God. And then the quote continues by saying, "But as persecution ceased and Christianity entered the courts and palaces of kings, she laid aside the humble simplicity of Christ and his apostles for the pomp and pride of pagan priests and rulers. And in place of the requirements of God, she substituted human theories and traditions." You see, the freedom that they had received had been misinterpreted and abused by them instead of remaining faithful to God. And then again it says the nominal conversion of Constantine in the early part of the 4th century caused great rejoicing, just like we mentioned earlier. But it says, the world, clothed with a form of righteousness, walked into the church. Now the work of corruption rapidly progressed. Paganism, while appearing to be vanquished, became the conqueror. You see, apparently, by the conversion of Constantine, Christianity overcame paganism. But in reality, as it says here in the Spirit of Prophecy, through this alliance between Christianity and paganism, Christianity had more to suffer than paganism. And we remember from history that the compromise was made in such a subtle way that the Christians, many of them, did not even realize. The pagans came and said, we are going to leave our gods alone. We are not going to worship Jupiter or other idols. We are going to worship Saint Peter. So they built statues that were called Saint Peter or Saint Paul, and in reality they were worshiping the same gods, but in a Christian manner. So it seemed good for Christians to accept this compromise. And they thought that the pagans were being converted to Christianity, when in reality Christianity was being converted to paganism. And they said, we are not going to worship the sun anymore, but you have to accept to worship in the day of the sun, which was actually the same thing in a different way. So the war between good and evil had been for a moment forgotten by the Christians. And they thought that while Constantine was still a member of the Christian church, there was no conflict between Christianity and paganism. But that they were deceived. The war was still going on. It was just fought at a different level. You see, Satan is very smart. When something doesn't work, is he going to give up just because he was overcome once? He did not give up when he saw that through persecution it didn't work, that Christianity was flourishing under persecution. He didn't give up. He just thought that a different method would work better. And it did, didn't it? The Christians that were used to persecution gave in so easily to just being treated like human beings. They had given up on the simplicity of Jesus Christ, and they grasped the luxurious life of the paganism, and this is how the papacy or the religious Roman power was born. Christianity delights in reading verses that speak about freedom, right? When we speak about freedom, and especially when we read Bible verses about freedom, we like it so much because we, especially here in America, like the word freedom. This country was founded upon this principle of freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and so on and so forth. We like this expression, but with freedom does not necessarily come a lot of blessings. Now, I had the privilege to be born in a country that religiously wise was persecuted for a long time. When I came to church, it was already after communism, but I still remember the stories that our brethren told me about how much they suffered. And we surely have a few brethren here that went through those moments of persecution. And everybody, they told me that when they received the freedom to worship, to build churches, to spread the gospel, they were so happy for that to happen. And I want to tell you that I'm very thankful to the Lord that He offered us the privilege to have freedom in that country, because if it wasn't for the freedom, they would not be able to go canvassing from door to door, and it would be very difficult for them to find me. But from the moment they received the freedom to worship and to preach the gospel, they went out in groups, a lot of young people, and they finally got to my door as well. About 3 years after the fall of communism, they came to my door as well, and they found me. And I am very thankful for it. But you know, when I look back, at the young people that used to be a good example for me. I was a young man, I was 18 years old, and I was looking up to every young person that I would see in the crowd. And I would see them sing, play instruments, being so faithful to God, and I was so thrilled, so encouraged through it. I thought I would never be able to recover all those years of being in the world and being a Christian like they were. They were privileged to be born in the church. And now when I go back to Romania, it is very difficult for me to find those young people in the church. It is those that used to be an example to me, that would not seem like ever wanting to even try sin. Many of them are not Christian anymore. And it hurts me. Sometimes I think that, I would like to be able to sing a song, to encourage those that encourage me through song. I would like to be able to preach to those that preached to me when I came to church, and they helped me make a decision for the Lord. Well, unfortunately, some of them do not give me a chance. They don't even want to see me. I don't know whether it is because they don't want me to see them in that condition, but it's really hurtful to see that with freedom does not necessarily come progress in the spiritual life. Well, you see, the spirit of prophecy says that the time will come when things that we neglect to do now, we'll have to do in different circumstances that will hurt us. We will have to preach the gospel, giving up our life for it, giving up our freedom for it, but we will do it if we will still be part of the remnant of her seed. So now, when Satan cannot succeed through persecution that is coming from outside the church, what is he bringing? He is bringing his fight within the church. He is not going to give up. And you see, if we do not watch and pray, we believe that as long as there is no persecution coming from outside, we are safe. We are just among God's brethren. We have our doors closed. We have the gate closed. Nobody can come in. Nobody can go out. We are safe. Finally, we can worship in freedom. We can be faithful to God. We can openly preach the gospel. We are okay, brethren. But guess what? Satan will not be stopped by a gate, and he will not be stopped by closed windows. He is going to bring in elements that will continue to fight against the success of God's church. Is that true or not? Yes, it is. Well, the spirit of prophecy goes as far as saying that when we come together to worship, Satan brings his elements to worship together with us. And we gain confidence, we are okay, and we trust each other's advices, and we trust each other's example, and we follow each other like sheep follow shepherds, and we don't realize that some of the things that we follow may not be correct, but we feel safe. We open our hearts to each other, and we don't know when the enemy is approaching and is going to bruise our heel. And then when we are bruised, it may be too late many times to recover. But the Lord is good. And remember, together with the prophecy, there is a promise that the church will prevail. Isn't this beautiful? It doesn't matter what we go through. One brother may apostatize, but he may be recovered because there is a promise that the blood of the Lamb can help us, right? And a group may apostatize, but no problem. There is a promise. As long as we still look forward to God cleansing us and prepare us for the great tribulation, prepare us for the last moments of the history of this earth, as long as there is time, there is what? There is hope. Well, you see, when Satan fights against us from outside through persecution, and we resist it, he comes through different means within the church, and we are less likely to oppose his work when he does it from within the church. And then when he doesn't succeed in some cases, with the apostasy from within the church, what is he going to do? He is going to bring the war against us personally. He always devises different plans, different means, different ways by which he will want to succeed. This is why we have to watch and pray, because we may be watchful for the persecution that is coming from outside. We may be watchful to the trials that may come from within the church, but we may neglect to watch the things that come from within us. This is a different level where Satan is fighting his fight. He cannot succeed through persecution. He cannot succeed through apostasy from outside, from others, but he may succeed from personal, interior temptation. And this is where many of us fail today. Have you heard of Christians that separate themselves from everybody else just to make sure that they will be faithful to the end and they will be overcomers? Have you heard of people like this? Yes, I've heard of people like this, and there is a story about this lady that she decided that she would separate from everybody else so she could be faithful to God. She went up in the mountains. She was living in a cabin separated from everybody else. And one day she decided to go get some water from the creek. And as she went to get the water, she placed her bucket on a rock. But as she was washing her hand, the bucket would fall and it would not hold water. So she did it once, she did it 2 times, she did it 3 times. Finally, she took the bucket, she hit it to the rock, and the bucket broke. She had nothing to bring water with. Now, where did the temptation come from? There was nobody around. There was no persecution. There was no bad example around her, but there was some evil that she hadn't overcome, and that evil was not outside, it was in her. So she realized that actually she should not depend on the persecution of the pagans to be faithful. She should not depend on the faithfulness of somebody else. She should only rely on God to remain faithful. You see, when we read verses like Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, the first part where it says, "For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty." That sounds so good to us. And let me tell you that in today's society, that Bible verse is very much appreciated by many Christians. And I had the privilege to talk to many about the need for us to be faithful to God to the end. And they said, look, God has called us to liberty, which means that we can worship Him any way we want, we can understand the Bible any way we want, we can eat everything we want, as long as we have the freedom, as long as we ask God's blessings over what we do, we are free to do whatever we want. Well, I remember a Bible verse which addresses to the young people and says, "Rejoice, ye youth, in the days of your youth," right? Walk on the ways that you like, that your heart desires. Right? Doesn't that sound good? It sounds very good. But at the end, the Bible verse says, "But remember this, that for everything that you do, God will hold you responsible. God will call you into judgment." Well, if we had that in our mind, we would behave differently. We would use freedom differently. It doesn't matter whether there is somebody to the right or to the left seeing us doing something wrong. Remember that one day we will face this in the judgment. So the first part of verse 13 from Galatians 5 says, "For ye, brethren, have been called unto liberty." And that sounds good, doesn't it? But misinterpretation of the freedom offered by Constantine to the early Christian church brought the early Christians in a state of rejoicing, at the same time in a state of indifference. They sat on the throne and they said, "Wow, the pagans are not here anymore. The pagans are actually our brethren. There is no war going on. There is no fight going on." So they decided that they would relax. It was a misinterpretation of the freedom that they had received. At the same time, the spiritual freedom that we want to experience today may bring us in a state of relaxation as well, not to care about anything but ourselves. In discussing our liberty in Christ, Paul warned us that there is a danger when you have the freedom or when you have the liberty, and the second part of the verse explains it. But we are going to read the entire verse right now. Again, it says, "For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh." So what happens many times? When we are being persecuted, we are limited. We cannot go around. We cannot eat the things that we would want to. We would just limit ourselves to what we have handy, to what we have right close to us. And the danger is when you receive freedom, what do? You can go out, you can eat more things, you are easier tempted, and you get to the point of enjoying so much the freedom that you will get to abuse it and use it. Instead of using it to preach the gospel, you are going to use it as an occasion to the flesh. Now, we can take a few examples. When we were limited, I remember that just like now in Cuba, in some of the countries, you cannot eat as much bread as you want. You cannot. Because you are limited by a portion that they would give you daily. They would not sell you more bread than you are designated by the government. I can't believe it's still going on in Cuba right now. But I remember when I was a child, the family had a card that when you went to the store, you were supposed to present it, and they would perforate it for the day that you purchased the bread. If you had 5 members in your family, you were allowed to only purchase 2.5 breads. And that, as we went, we had the money, but they would not sell to us 3 breads. They would only sell 2.5 breads. The third bread, they would cut in half. And sometimes they would give you the smaller portion of the bread. And I remember that I would want to get the bigger one. But you didn't have a choice. They handed it to you. You see, we didn't have the freedom, but guess what? I remember that as a child, I lived in a place where there was plenty of grapes. And sometimes foreign cars were passing through because I was living on the road that led to the Black Sea. So from different countries, cars would come towards the Black Sea, and they would stop the car, and we as children were willing to give lots of grapes to them if they gave us some candies or something that were not from our country, We were so happy to get something. So when freedom came, all the stores became loaded of colorful produce. You could choose. You could get anything you wanted. Well, in the time of persecution, we had, or they had, because I was not in the church, but they had limits as far as eating is concerned. When freedom came, then everybody, decided that they would change their lifestyle because there was the opportunity to live differently. You see, at the end, everything comes to personal choices. Because we will not depend on each other. We will not even have pastors around that will tell us what is good and what is bad. Not that they know better, but we will not have them around. We will have nobody spying on us, whether we do the right thing or not. We will be on our own, and we will make choices. But believe me that the choices that we make right now, the small choices, will affect us in making greater choices tomorrow, when we will be on our own. So how do we educate our children today? Do we tell them that as long as there is no persecution, they can do whatever they want? Or do we teach them that it doesn't matter what's around us, we have to be straightforward, we have to be the same Christians that we used to be all the time? Or do we change according to circumstances and we give our children a bad example in that sense? How can we avoid the destructive influences of the flesh? Because we know how to avoid persecution, don't we? We go into the catacombs. We know how to avoid apostasy. We just make friends. That would be a good example to us. But how do we avoid the influences of the flesh that are coming from within us? Well, this is another story, right? But Galatians chapter 5, verse 15 gives us a very good idea about what we are supposed to do. And it says, "This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh." It's very simple, right? So it's not like, run away from the flesh or run away from temptation. No, it just says it doesn't matter how many temptations there are. You just choose one thing, walk in the Spirit. And when you do, guess what? The world will have no effect on you. And you will not feel like you would be attracted to the world because you walk in the Spirit. The Bible says a house that is built on a hill cannot be hid. Even if you try it, you will not be able to, because you are built on the rock Jesus Christ, and your example is going to influence those around you. Not circumstances have to change, but perception of the circumstances have to change. Not those around us need to change so we can be faithful. Those that need to be changed is us. And not the clothes we wear, not the diet that we have, not the lifestyle, what we are supposed to change, not us, but Christ. What change we need is actually the change of our nature. If our nature is changed into the likeness of Jesus Christ, our natural desires are going to be sanctified. Our natural inclinations are going to be sanctified. And all we will want, naturally, not forcefully, is to do God's will. Because our nature is divine, is not carnal anymore, is not fleshly. Spirit and flesh are contrary to one another. But guess what? Until the coming of Jesus Christ for the second time, the two will still be living together. Isn't that interesting? The flesh and the spirit. Remember the Bible verse from Galatians chapter 5, verse 17? The first part says, "For the flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh." And again it says, "And the two are contrary to one another, so that you would not do the things that you would." The flesh and the spirit are contrary to one another. Can we serve both, the flesh and the spirit? Can we serve both of them? Well, Christians believed they could be Christians and pagan at the same time, and they failed. They lost the battle. They were not overcomers, they were actually overcome. But coming back to us, the title of this sermon is Overcomers. Brethren, do not expect to overcome everything when Jesus comes. It will not happen. The power to overcome is given us not through the latter rain, is being given us through the early rain, which was poured upon the disciples in their early days. It was poured upon the apostles, and with that we have enough to overcome sin. But there are new theologies that teach that we actually cannot overcome sin here in this flesh. We have to wait for Jesus' second coming so we could be transformed in character and in body. But we know that God can give us the strength to overcome today. And I believe that from all my heart. Flesh will enslave us. The more freedom you think you have, the more slave you become. And that's a paradox. The more freedom you think you have, the more slave you become. Because this freedom that we misunderstand many times is going to make us so addicted to the pleasures of this world that when somebody would come to tell us that we do not walk right, we are going to oppose to the good advice. And we are going to want to live like we want to because we got used to it. We become slaves to it. In Romans 7:15, Paul the Apostle says, "For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that I do not. But what I hate, that do I." You see, when there is a conflict between the flesh and the spirit, especially when the two are equal, kind of, or there is no much difference on how strong the flesh is and how strong the spirit is, there is so much confusion that you don't know what to choose. So the only hope for us today is to strengthen the spirit. And when they come into conflict, the spirit is going to prevail because it is stronger, because it's being fed by the study of the word of the Lord. It's being fed by good customs. It's being fed by different circumstances. The spirit will be strong and the flesh will have no strength over it. This is our only hope. How can we walk in the spirit? How can we keep walking in the spirit? I will end with Romans chapter 8, verse 5. "For they that are after the flesh do it because they mind the things of the flesh." So why are we after the things of the flesh? Because we keep meditating on the things of the flesh. But those that walk in the Spirit do so because they mind the things of the Spirit. Remember the Bible phrase that says that we have to look for things above, not the things on earth. Well, I am very thankful to the Lord that He gave us the opportunity to study His Word in freedom. But this will not last forever. My wish and prayer is that we would be the Christians that God wants us to be, that we would be the woman, and that we would remain faithful to Him, even if the majority of what composes the woman or the church will fail. We hope that we will be the remnant of her seed. We hope that we will be overcomers, not the way that the Christians were overcomers at the beginning of their experience, but overcomers in the rightful way. Overcomers through the blood of Jesus Christ. May the Lord help us to not indulge the desires of the flesh so much as to not be able to make distinction between right and wrong. There is a Spirit of Prophecy quote which says that men will soon be forced to make great decisions. And it is our duty to tell them the truth, and it is our duty to give them a good example. We live in a time when the gospel or gospels are being shared through radio, through television. People preach about Jesus Christ so much that the world is even tired of hearing of it. But there is something that I noticed. The more they preach about Jesus, or the more we preach about Jesus, the less of Jesus there is in the world. Did you notice that? When there was less opportunity to preach the gospel freely, there seemed to be more interest in the gospel. But now that we have the freedom, now that Jesus' name is being preached through so many means, there is less of Jesus in the world. People are tired to hearing presentations about Jesus. But there is something the world desires. They are hungry for it. And it's not presentation of Jesus, it is the representation of Jesus. And I believe that the reason God still has a remnant, the reason God has called so many churches throughout the history, is because those before them failed not to preach, failed not to present, but they failed to represent. And Jesus called the remnant of her seed not to present, but to represent. And I believe that this is why God has called the Reform movement to existence. Because there was a lot of presentation. Remember, in the experience of early Adventism, there was so much presentation of the truth that everybody who would hear it would get converted. That's how much power argument had. But as they advanced in this experience, they trusted so much the power of argument that they forgot about Jesus. And this is why the Lord has brought to them the message of righteousness by faith through Johnson Waggoner, because they lacked the essence of the truth, so that they could be saved and help others be saved. You see, today we are called not to present, but to represent. And every time you go out and try to say a word, remember that the word you say has to be just like the life you live. Because when there is an inconsistency between what we say and what we live, it's going to distract people's attention from Jesus to yourself. And they will be tired, just like the world is tired today of hearing about Jesus. They want to see something different. They want to see somebody experience what has been preached for so long by so many Christians. And may the Lord help us, that we may be those that people are looking for and looking up to, is my prayer. Amen.